Okay, everybody, welcome. We're here speaking to Leonardo Benzant, whose work is featured in A Very Anxious Feeling, Voices of Unrest in the American Experience, 20 Years of the Beth Rudin DeWoody Collection. A bit about the exhibition. Uh, this exhibition shines light on the widespread feelings of apprehension in contemporary artworks from the 1960s to the present in the Beth Rudin DeWoody Collection. Acquired over the past 20 years, the works in the exhibition reference both collective and personal concerns, highlighting the intersectional voices and experiences of Latinx and Latin American artists living and working in the US, making visible their descent, joy, and transcendence. Leonardo Benzant is an artist based in New York City whose sculpture, painting, installation, sound, and performance art are driven by his connection to the trans-African Atlantic diaspora. As an urban shaman, Benzant explores both his familiar, visible world as well as the hidden dimensions of other realms, considering the possibilities of genetic imprints, cultural identification, and innate and intuitive beliefs. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Oh, first, congratulations. You debuted a new piece at Claire Oliver. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
I have a piece currently up at the Claire Oliver Gallery in Harlem.
What's it called?
It's called That Which Weaves All of Time Together.
And it's a group show?
Oh, yes. The group show is called For Now.
Okay, great. Congratulations.
I thought you meant, what's the title of my piece in the show?
Well, no, I did. Both that and the group. So you can see it at Claire Oliver through January, what, 1st or 7th?
I think it's the 7th, but I don't quote me on that.
Oh, go to Claire Oliver Gallery and see it.
I have everything there.
Okay, so Leonardo is going to kindly show us an artist presentation. Do you want to take it from here?
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
So, again, my name is Leonardo Benzant, and I'm an artist. And so, if we can see the first image, the cover image, this cover image has two of my it exemplifies two of my primary practices, painting and sculpture. And I just wanted to say that my practice, my work is about creating a cosmology based on ritual, and how I draw on the various African spiritual practices that I'm involved in to create my own language, grammar, and currency. And I use beads, as beads were an actual form of currency. And in the context of my work, they're building blocks for creating my own artistic vision. We could move to the next slide. So in this painting, which over the last 10 years, I've been working primarily in sculpture and painting. The paintings are often based on a system of ideographic writing, and the sculptures draw on my African Caribbean roots and are based on a constellation of ideas, including cosmology, conjuration, resistance, self-definition, and self-empowerment. And both my sculptures and my paintings are based on creating a visual vocabulary that references ritual. And we could see the next slide, please. Okay, this is an image, a reference image from a book called Flash of the Spirit by Robert Farris Thompson. And it's a representation of what's called an Nkisi, a Congo charm that reveals the inner contents of what is conceived as a miniaturized world. And it relates to my work in the following images, in the sense that it's an ongoing preoccupation or investigation of mine. This idea of a miniaturized world, a concentration of forces. The next image. Wait, before we move on, I'd like to share a quote from the same book, Flash of the Spirit by Robert Farris Thompson. It's the prenda is the entire world in miniature, a means of domination. The ritual expert places in the kettle all manner of spiritualizing forces. There he keeps the cemetery and the forest. There he keeps the river and the sea, the lightning bolt, the whirlwind, the sun, the moon, the stars, forces and concentration. And we could see the next image. In this painting, um, I wanted to point out how the larger oval shape um, contains smaller elements, and this echoes my investigation into Nkisi and this idea of a miniaturized world, and and in this particular painting, the idea of shapes inside of shapes, a world within a world. And later on, when we speak about the piece that's actually in this exhibit, we're gonna be able to see a correlation between this kind of visual strategy of of a world within a world. Okay, we could see the next image, please. So these are other examples of an Nkisi or Congo charm. The one on the left is one that is in Angola, in Central Africa, and the other one is an Nkisi in Cuba. And these charms continue to inspire and inform my paintings and sculptures. The construction of an Nkisi is an accumulation of multiple elements that form a complex whole, which is a strategy that I use to make things. The sense of an amalgamation of many elements. And the next image is we can move. Yeah, the next image is an image of two paintings that I created, and in these paintings, I'm continuing to explore these ideas of larger forms that contain many elements. And in this case, I've used um, I've used large heads in the composition, and it echoes a Dominican saying, "Cada cabeza un mundo," which loosely translates as "In every head there's a world." And so that's also a parallel to this idea of the Nkisi being a miniaturized world. And I'm also incorporating ideographic writing, and both these ideas, the ideographic writing, kind of like start to show up in my beaded sculptures later on. And we could see the next image. So right here is a reference image from a book called Beads, Body, and Soul. And this is what's called an Egungun masquerade, which is composed of mostly fabric, but many other kinds of materials are incorporated. You can see beads are there too, and cowrie shells. And these masquerade costumes are constructed to honor the memory of the ancestors, and they include medicines that are hidden within the structure of the costume. And one of the things that strikes me about this image is the abstraction of a figural presence, and that becomes pivotal for me. You know, this conflated sense of like abstraction and figuration, which I think is very traditional African in a way. And you can see in the following image how it inspires the next body of work that I call Afro-supernatural entities and archetypes. And these different entities here are part of, in a way, are part of the cosmology of cosmograms that I constantly allude to in my work. They're representations of different totemic beings inspired by oral history, and in these characterizations, I'm paying homage to various spirits, making connections between African spirituality and resistance in archetypes such as cimarrones, which means maroons, the Spanish word for maroons. Each of these figures are individual pieces with their own names and histories. And in the next image, this this is like very much a transition piece. It's a fabric assemblage where I'm using a polychromatic palette, and it's also inspired by the Egungun masquerade. And the polychromatic palette corresponds to the idea of how in African practices the visual, the oral, and the tactile are connected. Visual patterns, rhythms, the sense of touch, and other multi-sensory experiences are connected. The work also reflects on how I tend to pull from various African spiritual traditions, and I place coins, prayers, and other kinds of objects in the fabric forms. I spray rum, I blow tobacco smoke, and this is all symbolic of making an offering to align my work with a ritualizing power. And by ritualizing the work, I create a way for it to hold meaning, personal meaning, collective meaning in a particular energy. There's also a connection between the curtain-like structure that we saw in the earlier image of the Egungun masquerade. There's a connection between the veil and this curtain-like structure as a metaphor for a threshold between the world of the immaterial world and the material world, between the world of the ancestors and the world of the living. So this piece is where I'm beginning to think about the artist as a bridge between worlds, and thinking of myself in the role of artist as a channel, a conduit, a ritualist, a conjurer, a type of urban shaman. By situating my practice between the physical and spiritual world at once sacred but also secular. And I'm looking at my notes real quick. So another thing I wanted to note about this piece is that it's a breakthrough piece for me because it involves letting go of the idea of that I had to be a painter as an artist. And here I'm beginning to use different kinds of materials that I could elevate to project um, a sense of high art, even if the materials I'm using are considered part of craft materials. And I begin to use materials outside of the Western concept of fine art. I begin to embrace ideas of shamanism and transformation. It was a transformative healing process for me doing this piece. As I was letting go of something associated with symbols of colonization, a modality that I had been putting on a pedestal, and this put me in an auspicious position to reinvent myself and my language. Working with fabric in this way led me to work with materials of conjuration. It represents the beginning of elements of conjuration as a kind of what I call paraphernalia, as instruments of transformation. It opened up the possibility of creating my own vocabulary, not only in strategy, but also materials. So, in the next image, we have a paquet Congo. And this reminds me of a Kikongo word, kange, which refers to things that are tied up. So in my work, I'm continuing to think of this idea of bundling forces of energy. It's where the act of sewing, wrapping, weaving, knotting, tying up things, harnessing, pulling together different elements and materials to capture a sense of a force. I began to inspire. This process began to inspire me to work with fabric to create tubular structures that echo these ideas of harnessing and capturing forces by wrapping long beaded strands around the tubular structures. And in the next image, this is the beginning. This piece is the beginning of what I call paraphernalia of the urban shaman, M5. And the particular shapes of these discrete sculptures are are alluding to the word are alluding to the idea of snakes, or in Kikongo nyoka. And I wanted to point out that in European tradition, snakes are often thought of as dark or destructive energies, and but in this African tradition, snakes are actually sacred, and they represent guardians of our traditions. So in thinking about all that, I'm kind of grappling with this idea of, being uh being a child of colonized people, and I'm thinking about double consciousness, how this alludes to double consciousness. As a child of Dominican immigrants raised in a Catholic school, you know, embracing this sort of African worldview or cosmology. And in the next image, this piece, Radiations of the Midnight Walker, allude to the time when an ngangulero, which is a ritual expert, um, chooses to work magic, sometimes with destructive intentions, noting that destruction is also an act of creation. Sometimes we must destroy things to rebuild them. So, for example, I'm using a white mannequin and I've decapitated it, and I've disfigured it, and in doing so, I'm transforming it. And in this case, I'm reinventing and redefining my own sense of an identity by Africanizing aspects of European material culture. And so we can see the next image. This piece moves me further away from looking at the body in a figurative way exclusively. And so I'm beginning to materialize a more abstract, ideographic embodiment. And the abstraction here of a figure of this figure is inspired by a dream that I had with a black woman who was sort of a muse in my dream. Okay, and the next image, this was originally a piece that I created in the context of a show, an exhibit that was based on a historical figure known as Jose Antonio Aponte, and he was a resistance leader in Cuba and part of an anti-slavery movement in 1812. He was also an artist, a carpenter, formerly enslaved and later executed for his leadership. In a trial which led to his execution, he was questioned about a book of paintings which were seen to be connected to the movement. He describes Aponte describes a vividly vi, well Aponte describes vividly in the trial this book of paintings. However, due to the pressure that I feel Aponte must have been under because of the Eurocentric gaze, the colonial gaze, or whatever, I realized that probably much of what he was describing about his book of paintings that he was, undergoing this trial for were probably he was probably giving the information in a coded manner as a strategy for protection, but also as a strategy for allowing his ideas to continue in a coded way, almost undetected by the powers that be, you might say. And this kind of thinking, it further it was further inspiration for me to continue to think about developing my own coded manifesto, expressed in the title of my ongoing series of beaded sculptures, Paraphernalia of the Urban Shaman M5. So the M5 is alluding to a cosmology that refers to my own visual language of forms and strategies that have their own grammar and their own currency. And if we could see that the next image, I continue to build out this series, Paraphernalia of the Urban Shaman M5. I'm building. It's like I'm building a world, and I'm using the strategies of a shaman, and I'm, in a sense, thinking about my alignment with the traits of resistance leaders, tricksters, and maroons to weave a cosmology, to weave my own system. I'm drawn to these counter figures within the colonial framework and connecting to the idea of African spirituality as a tool for resistance, but also for self-empowerment. In this image, again, it's a continuation of creating my own grammar, language around the idea of transformation. So the coded manifesto expressed in the title M5, refers to 5 concepts: um, moyo, malongo, migrations, melanin, and modalities. And M is the 13th letter of the alphabet, which is also symbolic of the astrological sign of Scorpio, which I am. And the 5 refers to the Yoruba Orisha or deity known as Oshun. Um, so I'm transposing these ideas from my from I'm transposing these ideas from initiation ceremonies into my own coded system that connects to ritual offerings. So, for example, if I'm going to give an offering to Oshun, I'm going to work in her number being 5. So I might bring Oshun 5 oranges, or I might offer Oshun honey for 5 days. So in this way, the act of in the context of my work, the act of making my work was an offering for the purpose of invoking a sense of transformation by enlisting forces greater than myself, energies that I'm tapping into. And the voice in my work is not only my own individual voice, but it's also it's the voice of the ancestors and the collective. And I'm also connecting that these forces are both ancient but also contemporary, and they relate to the past, present, and future. And the last and final image, which has it has the piece that's in the show on the far left, that that is that I remember ritualizing that sculpture by actually placing bundles of plants associated with ritual. And in the piece on the right, which is the piece that's in the show, Black Joy Takes Courage, at the Taubman Museum, it's like I'm tying together many of the ideas that I've been working on in my series, Paraphernalia of the Urban Shaman, M5. Because in this series, I'm bringing together elements that represent pleasure and joy. I explore the metaphor of how the spider, as a totem or as a trickster in folktales, African-derived folktales, I explore the metaphor of using of how the spider uses weaving as weaving a web as a tool to capture one's desires. And there's a hidden doll incorporated in the sculpture, which represents new possibilities. I was also thinking about transformation in the sense of a narrative. I was also thinking of transforming the narrative. In this work, I was thinking of transforming the narrative around Blackness from suffering, unhappiness, and being overwhelmed with oppression and racism to a perspective that embraces pleasure and joy as radical forms of resistance, empowerment. It's a respite from the struggle and encourages permission for self-care and love. And I wanted to end by saying that so much of the colonial experience is an existential disruption and interference of our systems, our way of life, and our sense of who we are. which is very disempowering. I want my work to have a presence that reflects my investment in the powers of traditional African practices that predate this colonial disruption and that were also used as strategies to combat it and to survive it. My practice is devoted to harnessing and radiating these energies and ideas to create works that embody this process of self reflection, transformation, and healing.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's brings up a ton of questions that I have, but several that were submitted by people who follow you. Hidden doll, really?
I mean, it may not be so hidden, but
well, I'm gonna have another look. So your paraphernalia of the urban shaman, or M5, when did you begin working on that concept?
I began working on that concept in 2012.
So your work, I noticed, did it become more ideographic around that time?
Yes, I think I was always connecting to ideography. For example, there are ideographic signs that have vertical lines. And my first representations of the paraphernalia of the urban shaman M5 sculptures were very much like vertical forms, and I was kind of like making a parallel to those vertical signs that allude to the connection between the world of the living and the world of the dead.
And you mentioned the veil as the veil or threshold as well. And the weaving net portions, do you consider that part of a veil
yeah,
figure
I
as well?
so. It's kind of a veil between dimensions of experience.
So we have some amazing questions here, and these people clearly have studied your work and watched your interviews and videos. One person asked, I'd love to hear about any connection between the Egungun masquerades of Nigeria, which you already spoke about a bit. Masquerades.
Yeah, so they want to know the connection. Yeah. So early on, I gravitated toward Egungun masquerade when I first got involved with Yoruba practices, and I set up an Egungun altar, which I have. It's an adapted version because, as you know, Black people came into the Americas, the traditional things that we brought with us in our heads, you know, that are part of our cultural memory, they took on new manifestations. So, you know, I have an Egungun altar. We don't really have a Egungun masquerade in the Americas, but one of the things that I have on my Egungun altar is in and it's a stick to that you use to tap as a way to communicate with the ancestors, and this stick is often dressed in 9 colors. So it's like, again, like the Egungun masquerade. It's kind of a parallel to this polychromatic palette that is associated with the ancestors. And so yeah, the presence of the Egungun is in my consciousness when I'm working.
Your palette and your connection to ancestors. One of these questions is, so grateful for your inspirational art. Was it a conscious choice to utilize the ancestors' vibration to create art, or were you chosen?
That's that's kind of a deep question. The chosen one. Well, I like to think that in a sense I was chosen because early on as a little boy I could feel presences and see things. I had visions of things as a child. I mean, not to sound all esoteric, but I used to see things in the dark that other people wouldn't see, and I'm like, why do I see these things? You know, and so that kind of got me to investigating about what these different phenomenological things were. You know, like what were these presences and these things that I was feeling around me, and how they affect my vibration, my body, and that led me to, you know, investigate things. That led me to find out and connect certain dots, and how then all of this led me to embark on a spiritual path that now I sort it's part of it's part of a way of life, but it also informs my work.
When you spoke in the Beholder video about not necessarily feeling like you fit into your environment, it resonated with me. And I wonder if that is why your work actually grows in and occupies space and multiple dimensions to create the environment that you believe is an extension of you.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Growing up, for me, there was always a disconnect between me and my environment in certain ways, you know, between the environment of the street, the environment of going to Catholic school and praying to a white Jesus Christ on the cross and having to pledge allegiance to the flag, or having to fit into the typical idea of what it means to be Dominican, or the typical idea of what it means to be a man, or any number of things. So although at the time it was painful not to feel like I belong in any particular place, I started to more and more embrace it as a strength that allowed me to define my own sense of my own individuality, and I can sort of see I can sort of exist in different dimensions, and I think that multidimensional aspect maybe comes through, and the hybridity also in my work. You know, being Afro Latino, but growing up in Brooklyn, New York, with, you know, different people from different parts of the Caribbean and different parts of Latin America, and you know, it's like you become kind of a walking amalgamation of things.
Yeah. Um, I think that's it for now. Is there anything that you'd like to add, or what are you working on now? Anything coming up?
Yeah, I'm always working on something, at least in my head. Um, so I'm just preparing to start a new body of work for a solo exhibition coming up in 2020 at
Mm,
Claire Oliver Gallery.
yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
But still continuing with these ideas from Paraphernalia of the Urban Shaman, M5, but exploring new manifestations and forms and other new ideas. I'm always adding ideas to the pot. And
so,
so to sort of push the work into a natural evolution.
do you see yourself still dabbling in painting and sculpture, or do you see yourself going more toward sound, or is your work changing?
Hmm. That's interesting you ask, because primarily I think my practice will be centered. The sculpture will be central, but I've also been um, working on something I call sound sculptures.
Yeah.
Yeah, and And I at some point I would like to incorporate sound in my installations to sort of parallel the way that in a ceremony, you know, the oral or the audio sound is connected to visual, is connected to different multisensory experiences.
You know, what's interesting is I've watched videos of you wrapping your structures with beads, and there's a cadence, there's a rhythm to it.
Yeah.
Actually, it's quite soothing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's rhythmic, definitely. And
Yeah.
it comes out of the repetition naturally.
Okay. Thank you so much for your time today. It's incredible talking to you. It's a real honor.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.